you think that Jesus was a real historical person, right?
Yes.
And there are people you've debated that think that he's not.
Yes.
What is the argument to him not being a real historical figure?
Good question. You mean, well, good argument?
Yeah, what's the best argument you've heard?
Well, if I were arguing that case, I would say, I guess, I mean, you're saying it's the best argument is kind of like it's a very low bar.
Right.
It's best.
Understood.
Yeah, okay, what's my best round of golf? I mean, it's like, well, okay, it's like, I think what gives some people pause, not so much, yeah, okay. What would give people pause is that we don't have any eyewitness accounts of Jesus. Mm-hmm. We have records that are from probably 40 to 60 years later. Our first author who mentions Jesus is the Apostle Paul, and he's writing in the 50s. Jesus died around the year 30. So the first time we have Jesus mentioned in any source is about 20 years after his death.
Do we know when that drawing was done with the donkey head on the cross, the guy with the head of an ass on the cross?
Yeah, that's later. That's in the second or third.
Oh, it's later.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And it's a much debated thing. People say they know what it is, but in fact, it's debated among experts what it actually represents. It's clearly Jesus on the cross with a donkey's head.
Yeah.
And a graffiti next to it. But no, it's much later. So the first reference to Jesus at all our first Christian writing is the book of 1 Thessalonians. Mm-hmm. And it's usually dated to the year 49 or 50. Mm-hmm. Jesus died around the year 30. So it's about 20 years later. So the argument would be that we don't have any eyewitness reports, or we don't have any, things that are really close to the Gospels. The first Gospel is written around the year 70. So that's 40 years later. Mm-hmm. So why should we think he really lived? That's kind of the argument. Mm-hmm. It's not a good argument, but it's an argument.
Right. And it is crazy too. I mean, that goes with a lot of historical figures. Like I think Moses is one. Moses wasn't written about until, 1,000 years after he supposedly died?
Yeah, well, 30 years is very different from 1,000 years.
Yes, very different.
So when Paul's writing, there were people alive who knew Jesus.
Right.
And Paul knows some of them.
So it's a much better case for Jesus than Moses.
I mean, Paul knows his brother. Paul personally knew Jesus' brother. So, I mean, if Jesus didn't exist, you'd think his brother would know it. Mm-hmm. That's a joke. Moses is a whole different thing. I mean, so if Moses lived, Moses would have probably lived in the 13th century BCE. Mm-hmm. And it's not clear if we have any sources that mention him for centuries.
Right.
So that's a different thing from somebody talking about him who knows his brother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, totally. I mean, then the claims when it gets into him being divine and
that's a different story.
Doing all these things and being able to, that's the whole thing. Which I read recently, this fascinating book that really gave me a really good understanding of everything, which was Thomas Paine. I forget the name of his. I think it was The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine.
Yeah, no, it's a classic.
Oh my God, it was such a good book.
Yeah, no, these English deists were really something. They knew a lot, but they didn't know what scholars know today about things like the Bible.
Yeah, and he explains how like the first Christian preachers, how they were, selling Christianity, and then there was the second generation of Christian preachers, then the third generation of Christian preachers, and how the ideas and the motivations and everything gets lost in each generation, and then eventually down the road, it's kind of like the starting point, we don't even remember where this started, but we do know that the preachers are making a living off of this stuff, right? So the idea of Christianity is just like this game of telephone throughout history, especially when you have these people making a living off of it.
So, someone like Thomas Paine is a very important figure for like the history of biblical scholarship. He wasn't a biblical scholar himself.
Right.
But these 18th century English deists mainly, led to the development of biblical scholarship and the scholarship in early Christianity, especially in Germany, as it turns out, but then also in England and France and eventually in America. If you want to know what was really going on in Christianity, you don't want to rely on what they have to say because they're at the very beginning. It'd be like, if you're going to be studying what evolutionary biologists think today, you definitely have to start with Darwin. But you can't base your views of evolutionary biology on Darwin. You've got to see what we've found since then, because even though Darwin was a genius, there are other geniuses who are standing on his shoulders. Mm-hmm. And so he opened the way for people to learn more and more and more. But it'd be silly to assume that like everybody now agrees with what he was saying then, because they don't. And it's the same with any field. If you look at the giants because they're just absolutely amazing and they make these breakthroughs. But if you want to see what we know now, both on the basis of new discoveries and new ways of analysis and deeper analysis by experts, then you have to go to the modern experts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the most profound things that I took away from that book was that it is the gift of reason that gives man the ability to discover God in the first place, because it's impossible. Like, we didn't come from nothing, right? We go backwards in time. Like, I came from my parents came from their parents. Like, things don't just appear out of thin air. So it is just by us being as intelligent as we are, we have to understand that we can't appear out of thin air. There has to be some sort of higher power, right? Without that gift of reason, we don't have that.
Well, that's what these.
So it's like the human brain. There's something ancient in the human brain through evolution or whatever it is that makes it wired to be dependent on believing in a higher power.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's much debated about why people believe in higher power, and there are a lot going on. But the whole project that the people of the Enlightenment were doing, that Paine and the other people of the Enlightenment were doing, whether historians or philosophers or theologians or biblical scholars, whatever, what they were doing is they're trying to break with the tradition of the church that had been established for hundreds and hundreds of years, where your knowledge came from revelation from God. That's how you know things, because God reveals it to you. And the people of the Enlightenment realize, well, actually, we can figure things out ourselves. And that's when the sciences develop. And it's only when someone like Isaac Newton comes along and realizes, even though he's a devout Christian, he says, you can't trust revelation for anything. You've got to do the experiment. And if the experiment comes out to be differently from what you expect it to be because of your beliefs, so much the worse for your beliefs. Once you say that, you start science, and it changes everything. But Paine is all part of that, even though he's not a scientist.
Right. And a lot of those guys around Paine, like the founding fathers, they were Masons, right?
I suppose so. I'm not sure how that affected their, yeah.
Freemasonry was a big thing with the founding fathers.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting. It's just that's an interesting thing.
But the thing about all of these, Paine or anyone else, whatever their other associations, whatever their other religious commitments or non-commitments, whatever their philosophical stance, when they say something, it needs to be evaluated. Yeah. And that's true of everything. Mm-hmm. For me, I mean, I'm basically a historian. Mm-hmm. And so when I want to know whether somebody said is true or not, I have to do the analysis. So if he's a Mason, if he's whatever. I mean, today, if somebody is whatever, I mean, is a Satan worshiper, is a Mormon, is a Roman Catholic priest, whatever it is, if she or he says something, I look at it and evaluate it. Mm. It's not based on what they happen to be.